Hey, I got this new Raven LiDAR scanner from 3D Maker Pro. I want to show you how this compares against the Eagle from 3D Maker Pro. But in this video, I'll walk you through my workflow, how I use these devices for content creation, how I get the data on my computer, how I clean up the data, and then finally how I bring the data into a 3D program called Blender and use that to create visuals that help tell a story. So with all that said, let's see if the more budget-friendly Raven can compare with the Eagle. And before I go any further, I know the screens on these two products are different, so let me show you the Raven screen. Hopefully you can see that. And here is the Eagle screen. I'm not sure how well this shows up on video, but the Raven screen is significantly brighter than the Eagle. And just a heads up, 3D Maker Pro did send me this Raven for free to put it through its paces. They aren't paying for this review, and they haven't seen the video. So everything you're about to see is my actual, unfiltered experience over the last few weeks. And I know this video is incredibly long. I've broken it down into a bunch of chapters. And if you want to play around with some of these files on your own, check out the video description, where you'll find some links for those files. And I know a bunch of people may just want to see the comparison between the Eagle and the Raven. If so, again, check out the chapters in the video description, and that'll be towards the end of the video. All right, let's get into it. The first thing we're going to scan is this facade over here. And to make sure we get good capture data, I'm going to scan the perimeter at both chest level and elevated. But to get the elevated height I'm after, I'm going to put this thing on a painter pole. I'll go ahead and remove the handle that also includes the battery to get the center of gravity of the Raven a little bit lower. Then I'll screw in this tripod adapter, grab this painter pole I picked up off Amazon. I'll include a link if you want to buy one of these for yourself. Then to actually mount the LiDAR scanner on the painter pole, I use this ball head painter's pole adapter. I'll also include a link in the description. Now I'll screw the Raven onto the pole. Since I removed the Raven's battery grip, I'll need to provide an external power source. Thankfully, you can power the Raven with a USB-C battery pack. So I'll connect this 15-foot long USB-C to USB-C 60-watt power cable to the Raven, then stick the battery bank in a backpack. Now that I've connected the Raven to power, it's time to go scan. We'll start by powering the Raven up, making sure the exposure is set correctly. Then I'll name this file, and probably the most important step here is making sure your Raven starts and stops the scan in the exact same spot or as close to the same spot as possible. That way you close your scanning loop and the data should be more accurate. Here's the first pass of the scan. You can see I'm scanning this at basically eye level around the far perimeter of the facade. Once that's done, I'll go ahead and raise the Raven up. Just be mindful of power lines if you do this. And the reason I'm raising this up on the far perimeter is so the LiDAR scanner can fill in any gaps that it missed from when the LiDAR scanner was lowered to the ground. I'm basically just giving it more data. But since that was still pretty far away, I'm going to repeat the same process much closer to the facade. First starting at roughly eye level, then raising up the LiDAR scanner so it captures denser data towards the top of the facade. Then since I'm already here, I might as well turn the scanner around and capture the exterior of the scene. Then once again, I will lower the scanner and repeat the exact same process at eye level. Now that we've captured all the large details, I want to push in on the doorway since I think that's kind of the main focus of the scene. And I'll wave the scanner around here a little bit so that way you see all the obscured parts, including part of the ceiling. And finally, I'll walk the scanner back down to the start of our scan. That way we can close our loop. I'll finish the scan, click save, and then power it down. The process for the Eagle is the exact same. The only difference is the Eagle is an RTK unit, so it'll take a little while longer to connect to the GPS satellites. But once that's done, I repeat the same process I did with the Raven. That's basically the exact same workflow I use to capture small planes like a T-33 Shooting Star, all the way up to a C5 Galaxy. Now let's go ahead and walk through the steps of processing the data, cleaning up the data, and bringing it into a 3D program called Blender. Now it's time to process the scan, so once we've put our scans in Windows Explorer, we'll go ahead and open Ray Studio. Once Ray Studio is open, we'll go ahead and go to Open Project in the lower left corner of the screen. We will navigate to where we stored our scans. We'll go ahead and mess with the Eagle first since we'll have a baseline comparison. So we'll find the first scan we did for the Eagle and click Select Folder. This program's super simple. Your version may look a little different than this one. This is a beta version of the software, but the workflow should be about the same. So go to the bottom corner for data processing. This was an outdoor scan, so we'll click Outdoor. I want to include the color data from the LiDAR scan. I don't think I need a depth map for this. I will go ahead and resolve the image though. I'm not going to filter this because I'll clean up the scan in another program called CloudCompare. So we will unclick that. And since the eagle is an RTK unit, I will go ahead and turn RTK on, then click start. See, it's 10:06 p.m. right now. We'll see how long this takes. So this took about 20 or so minutes to process. Go ahead and click finish. We can see our point cloud from above. If we want to go into first person view, we can go ahead and click this little eye symbol over here. Then we can rotate around with the mouse. Then we can treat moving around just like a video game. We use the ASDW keys to move around. If you want to go up and down, you use Q and E to go up and down. If you want to speed up the movement, press up or down on your arrow keys a bunch of times, and you'll go way quicker by pressing up. So this is the point cloud from the Eagle. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this LiDAR scanner right now, since we'll go ahead and check out the Raven and see how that does. But first, let's turn this into a Gaussian splat as well. To do that, click on the eye symbol one more time, and in the bottom of the screen, you'll see something that says Gaussian splatting. Click that. I'm going to go for open in the scene and then high quality. I'll say I'm going to keep the sky, and I'll use GPU processing. Go ahead and click process and come back once this is done. I let Ray Studio solve the Gaussian splatting overnight, and then my computer locked up, so I had to restart it. If that happens to you, once you open your project back up, go into Gaussian splatting, and it'll look like you have to start over, but you don't. Drag your mouse over the image, and you'll see this pop-up show up where you can preview your Gaussian splatting. This will take a moment if you had a huge file. Once enter pops up, click on enter. It'll show you the controls, which these are the same controls as before. It's just the same as video game controls. It's ASDW and then Q and E to go up and down. Click out the X. Now we can check our Gaussian splatting out. And this looks pretty darn good. You can check out the details from when the camera's higher up. I'm going to go ahead and exit out of this. Then I'll go ahead and export the Gaussian splat by clicking export. The data will be watermarked unless you have a Studio subscription. For now, I'm just going to do direct export. Name the file whatever you want to. I'm calling this Eagle Facade 3D01. It's a POY file. Click save. It was exported successfully. Click OK. You can close out of this. Then the last thing I'm going to do with this Eagle scan is export the LiDAR file, which is this RTK color LAS. So click that. Click the export button in the upper right corner. This will be an LAS file. I will name this the same thing as the Gaussian splat. Click save. Then we'll play with this data in CloudCompare in a moment. But first, let's go ahead and export the Raven data. So go in the upper left corner of the screen to the home icon. Go to Open Project. Find wherever you saved your Raven data. In this case, it's the Facade Raven 01. Click Select Folder. Then go to the Data Processing, again in the lower left corner. This was an outdoor scan. We want the color data. We want to resolve the images. I do not want to filter the results. I'll click Start and come back in a moment. Now that the Raven LiDAR scan's done processing, let's go ahead and check that out. So click Finish. Go into the first person view and scroll around. And here we have the Raven scan. The point cloud looks a little less dense than the Eagle, but that's to be expected with the slower scanning speed on the Raven. Overall, though, you can still tell what this is easily with the point cloud. Then here's the back side of the facade. Let's check it out. Yeah, not nearly as dense as the Eagle. But let's go ahead and do the Gaussian splat for this. We'll go out of first person view, click on Gaussian splatting. For the scene, we'll say it's open or outdoors. Image quality, we'll say high quality. We'll retain the background, and we'll use GPU processing. Click process and see what happens. Now that Ray Studios finished up the Gaussian splatting training, let's go ahead and check that out. Click the Gaussian splatting, hover over the preview, then click preview. Here's our 3D Gaussian splat. You can go ahead and move in on the doorway, and we go down a little bit. You can see it captured data from the walls on the left and the right, and some of the roof, although we didn't push in very much on that. I don't see many, if any, floaters throughout the scene. And moving to the back side, you can see the bricks just fine. Looks good. You can see through the doorway. Yeah, this looks pretty good. So back to the start. So I'd say the Gaussian splatting looks pretty good with the Raven. The image might be a little bright. Maybe they'll fix that with an auto exposure update for the Raven at some point. But yeah, you can see the vegetation clearly. You can See the sign over here. Everything looks good. Now we'll go ahead and close out of this and then export the model. Name this whatever you want, click save. Then if we want to upload this file, we click on upload, give it a name, we can describe it, then click confirm, and the file will start uploading. And I am on a 1 gig fiber connection, so this was really quick. So it says go to scene.JimuMeta.com so we can browse for our file. So we'll click OK. And here we are on JimuMeta.com. You can see the current pricing. I don't know if this will change in the future, but to find our space, we'll go up to the upper right hand corner to see our console. You can see that it says we have 1 space uploaded. To see our file, go up to Space Management in the upper left corner of the screen. You can find the file that you uploaded. Go ahead and click on it. Then go ahead and click Enter, and we can see the file that we just uploaded, which on the free plan, there are a bunch of watermarks all over the screen. Right now, this is a public space. If you want to change this to a private space, again, go to Space Management, and you'll see a little 3D box. You can change this to private access or password access, but I'll go ahead and leave this as public for now, so I'll click Cancel. Alternatively, you can actually upload these on SuperSplat as well. Once you've logged into SuperSplat, go ahead and click on Upload Splat. We'll find our PLY file we just made, then drag it into the upload section. This is a pretty big file at 952 megabytes. Now that the file is uploaded, let's go ahead and view it. And you can see that the world's turned on its side, so let's go ahead and fix that. We'll go to the editor in the left corner of the screen, then click File, Import, find your file once more, and click Open. And once again, the world is on its side, but you can see the X and Y axis here. So let's go ahead and rotate the world. So we'll go up to the rotation. For this scene, we need to rotate the X axis. So we'll go ahead and hover over the X and click and drag into roughly here. We'll go ahead and raise up the scene so the actual ground intersects with the red and blue line. So let's go ahead and go to position, hover over the Y axis, and drag to the right. This looks roughly correct. Now we're going to zoom out with the middle mouse scroll. You can see that the scene is still tilted downhill. You can see the grids here. So go ahead and rotate this a little more on the X axis. That looks pretty close. Let's go ahead and make the scene go up a little higher. And let's actually make the rotation 90. Yeah, we'll say that is about correct. If you want to save this, go ahead and go to File, Export, PLY. And in this program, you can save this as a compressed PLY, so we'll go ahead and click on that, then click Export. I don't know what sort of magic it did, but it turned this 970 meg file into a 68 megabyte file. So let's go ahead and upload this for the public. We'll go to Manage Splats. We'll go ahead and exit out of the file that we uploaded. And let's go ahead and upload the splat that we fixed the orientation on. So upload splat, then get the compressed file and drag it on. It looks like this is finished processing, so go ahead and click on View. Now the world is right side up. Then we can view this just like in the JimuMeta program. Yeah, I do think the quality is a little bit lower. I could be mistaken, but this file is significantly smaller than the original one. But anyway, I just wanted to show you an alternative place to upload your Gaussian splats. Now let's go ahead and mess with the LiDAR scans. So there's this free program called CloudCompare. This is kind of like Photoshop for point clouds. Then before I go any further, I did forget to export the point cloud from the Raven, so we'll go ahead and do that now. Back in Array Studio, we'll close the Gaussian Splat viewer. We'll find our color point cloud, click on the export button. I'll name this Raven Facade LiDAR 01, click Save. Now back to CloudCompare. We'll find that point cloud we just exported, then click and drag into the viewer. We'll go ahead and apply everything, and now we've got a view very similar to the Array Studio version, but we're able to actually edit this somewhat. So for instance, let's say that we don't want all this stuff at the edge of the scan that we did where the data gets really sparse. I'll go ahead and zoom out and center the screen up a little bit by doing a right click with your mouse and then clicking and dragging to wherever you want to go. One thing that's kind of weird about CloudCompare is there's no undo button, so before going any further, you might want to clone your scene. To clone your scene, go to the left corner of the screen, click on the file, under Edit, go to Clone, then we'll turn this off. This will just be a backup. With the file we want to mess with selected, we'll go ahead and click on the scissor tool, which is called Segment. I'll do a real rough cut of this right now. Like, data is really sparse from here, 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 here. Again, I'm not going for like high detail here. Once you're done selecting what you want, do a right click to close this tool. Then we only want to include the stuff that's inside of this green box. So over here in this toolbar, we want to include the segment in. So click on the segment in. Now we have the choice to delete everything outside of it or turn that into another layer, just like in Photoshop. For now, I'm just going to turn it into another layer. Click on the plus check mark. If you wanted to delete everything, you click on the confirm and delete hidden points tool, but we're going to click the green check mark. Now it looks like it didn't do anything, but we can turn off the bottom layer. Then all the outside stuff disappears. So let's go ahead and scroll in with the middle mouse, and we can click and drag to see some various views of this. You can see this is actually in 3D. If you want to see some orthographic views, if you have a numpad, you can type 2, 4, 6, or 8. Here's 2, looks like the top down view. Here's 0, 4, 6, 8. They're just various views. But let's see a dead on, so I'll hit 0, then scroll in, use the right mouse to reposition the scene. Then I want to take this into Blender, but I want the file size to be a little bit smaller. So let's clean this up a little bit more. I'll go back to the top view by hitting 8, scroll out. So we're going to go ahead and keep just the road in the shot and whatever's in the middle of the road and delete all this vegetation. To do that, make sure that you're selected your layer. Go to your scissor tool or the segment tool, click on that, cut out the grass. It doesn't have to be perfect. Close the box by hitting the right click on your mouse. Then we want to remove all of this, so we're going to click on the remove button or segment out, then click the green arrow, and finally turn off that layer. I'll finish this up and be back in just a moment. Now that we've cleaned this up from the top down view, let's see how it looks straight on. I'll hit 4, and you can see that we have some floating, looks like power lines and trees from where we clipped out the ground. Yeah, we'll go ahead and make short work of this by hitting 4 again, going back to the scissor tool and clipping out what we don't want. This looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and zoom in. And you can see there is some noise in here since we didn't filter out this LiDAR scan in the Ray Studio. If we want to, we can filter this out here, or we can also filter it out in Blender. But first, let's go ahead and clean up these layers. I'm going to rename this one by double clicking and calling it Raven Main Scene. And I want to merge everything else together. So I'm going to click on the top layer, hold down Shift, click on the bottom layer just before the main scene. That way everything's selected. Then I'll hold down Control and click on the final layer that's not part of the main scene. We want to merge all these together. So move your mouse up just a little bit and you'll see Merge Multiple Clouds. Click that. It'll say, do you want to generate a scalar field? And we click No. Now if I zoom out, I can turn this layer on and off. And if I turn off the main layer, you can see the rest of the world around the facade and the road. So that's pretty cool. But back to showing you how we can clean up the scan that we actually want. First, I'm going to clone this scene in case I mess something up. So I'm going to click on the Raven main scene. Once again, go to Edit, Clone. Then I should probably also save this project before going further. So File, Save Project, and I'm calling this one Raven Facade CloudCompare 01. I'm putting 01 on this in case I want a different version of this. Click Save. Then to actually filter out this noise, click on the layer you want to mess with, go to this SOR, which stands for Statistical Outlier Filter. Let's leave this as default right now and click OK. And thankfully this does make a copy. So if we turn off the original layer, you can see that the point cloud is thinned out some and the image looks a little less noisy. Then before we go into Blender, I do want to split this up just a little bit more so I can show you something that's pretty cool. I'm going to go back to the top down view by hitting 8. I'll scroll out, select the scene once more, go back to the scissor tool, and let's cut around this like park section. Then we'll go ahead and segment in, click the check mark. Since we want the background layer to still stay intact, just on a different layer. We'll call the background Raven Main Street. We can turn this off for now. And the last thing we want to cut up is this elevated platform that the facade sits on. So I'll go ahead and zoom in and once more use the scissors tool to cut out the facade platform. We'll segment in and we want to keep the background. All right, I've got these layers set up in the way I want them. So let me tell you the plan for this. Let's turn off all these layers. I want to have each layer kind of fall in from the sky, then have another layer fall in and another layer. So that way the scene builds up over time. I want to start with this center layer. That's why I'm calling this O1. Then I want to have the second layer fall in from the sky, followed by this third layer, which is the street, and finally followed by the complete exterior of the scene, which is layer 4. And I'll also keep the main scene file just in case I need it. But I can delete the other layers because I will not need those anymore. So I've selected them and I'll hit delete. And once again, save this project, going to File, Save Project. I'm going to overwrite the file by clicking Save. Now, to get this into Blender, we need to save each layer as its own file. So we'll start at the center. Click the save icon. I'll make a new folder in here. I'll call this Raven Facade LiDAR Layers. Go into the folder. The file's already named from the layer we split up. Click save. We'll save this as an ASCII file and repeat the process for the rest of the files by clicking on the layer, hitting Control S and save ASCII. Now that we've got that done, let's go ahead and launch Blender. This is a free 3D program. I'll walk you through the basics of it, but this is by no means a comprehensive tutorial. Like realistically, this will probably take you about a month of doing tutorials to become kind of comfortable with it. Once in Blender, go ahead and click on the background, click this cube, we don't need it, hit delete. We'll go to our File Explorer, find the folder where we just made those layers, select everything, and drag it into Blender. We'll say import PLY. Now we've got this crazy looking LiDAR point cloud. You see this orange stuff, that's showing you what's selected right now. If you don't want to select anything, click on something gray in the background. And if this is your first time using Blender, you're probably going to have no idea how to move around. To treat this like a video game, like we did in Ray Studio, we need to enable that mode by pressing Shift tilde. That's the button right below the escape key. Now we can use ASDW to actually look around. And the first thing we notice is everything's black and white, but in CloudCompare we had color, so what's going on? Well, Blender needs some information on how the color works. So again, this is a very high level overview. I don't expect you to remember any of this. In the right corner of the screen, there's this green triangle that says data. Then you can see something called attributes here. And if we open this up a little more, this will show you all the data that's in the point cloud. And there's this one field called col. And that's the color data. So we need to apply that color data to the entire scene. And to do that, you'll need to go to both this shading tab and this geometry node tab. Let's go to shading first. We'll click new. We'll go ahead and name this. We'll call this LiDAR color shader. Hit enter. And we need to get that COL value into this node tree. So hit Shift A. Type in attribute, ATT, you'll see input attribute. Click somewhere to the left of the principled BSDF. You'll see this color field. Click and drag the color field to the base color, and nothing happened. That's because we haven't put the actual color attribute in this field down here. Go ahead and click in the field and type capital COL, hit enter, and nothing happened, which is to be expected because we need to tell the geometry of the scene to accept color. So go to the geometry nodes, click new. We'll name this LiDAR geometry. I'm going to zoom out a little bit with the middle mouse wheel. Now we're going to do something similar to what we did in the shading area. And I've got to use a cheat sheet because I just don't remember all this stuff. We're going to go ahead and separate the input from the output and click the input. Press Shift A, and we'll type in mesh to points and click somewhere over this white line, and immediately you can see something happened. So right now the point cloud is accepting light information. If we go up to the upper right corner of the screen, you'll see something that says viewport shading. Click on that, and we actually have a light right here. And you can see it providing light to whatever's closer to the points, and the further it gets away, they don't accept lights anymore because the light just falls off. If we turn the light off, you can see everything gets dark. So that's pretty cool. So that means we can relight the LiDAR point cloud within Blender by messing with our own lights, but we still need to add the color data. So we'll click on our scene that we've been adding the attributes to. I don't necessarily want these points to be the size they come in by default in Blender, so I want to be able to change those. Again, hit Shift A, and we're going to do set point radius. We'll go ahead and hover over this line right here and do a left click. You can change this to whatever you want to. I think the Raven and Eagle have an accuracy of 2 centimeters, which would be 0.02 meters, and you can instantly see things get smaller. But for the moment, let's go ahead and leave that at 5 centimeters. And here's where we get the color data. Once again, hit Shift A, type in something called set material, then bring this over the far right green line. Once again, hit the left mouse button, and in the material box, you can see all the materials we have. Well, we made one called LiDAR color shader, so let's go ahead and click that. And I don't know if you can see it, but we have a little bit of green in the park. But there's a ton of gray left in here still. That's because all the other layers are covering up the park. If we would happen to turn off the other layers while keeping the light layer on, you can see some yellow lines in the pavement now. You can see some red in the bricks. But let's make this scene a little brighter first. We're going to change what this light looks like by clicking on the light, going down to the bottom of the screen, clicking on this light icon that says data. We're going to turn this into a sun. So click sun right next to the point, and everything turned white. That's because this is way too bright. Let's make the strength over here at something like 100. It's still too bright. Let's try 5. We'll say that looks okay for now. We'll go ahead and look around the scene a little more by once again hitting Shift tilde, and we'll look around. Let's say we want the scene to have some more saturation. That's a pretty easy fix. We can go over to our shading tab, select the object again, and between the attribute and principal BSDF, let's make some more space. We'll go ahead and hit Shift A and type saturation. We'll see something that says hue saturation value. Click that and place it between attributes and principal BSDF. You'll see the saturation slider. Let's go ahead and crank that up. And now it is incredibly saturated. And since these points are showing up really well now, they do look really big. Let's go ahead and shrink those down. Go back to the geometry nodes, and under set point radius, let's change that to 0.2 like we originally had, and that looks pretty good. So the point should now be the size of 2 centimeters. Now let's see if this point cloud is true to life size. Let's go to layout in the upper left corner of the screen. If everything turns gray, to fix this, go back to the upper right corner of the screen and click on this thing that says Viewport Shading. That'll let the scene accept lights. Now, I didn't bring a tape measure, but you can see there's a door here. That door is probably about 8 feet tall in real life. Blender by default measures things in meters, which is 2.4 meters. So you might be saying, how are we going to see if that's actually 2.4 meters? Well, we can make a cube by pressing Shift A, going to Mesh, then go to Cube. And you might be saying, well, yeah, that's great, we have a cube, but how do we know how big it is? Hit N as in Nancy. Then you can see something called dimensions over here. We want to check out the vertical height of this, and vertical is on the Z-axis here. So we go to the Z-axis. We'll go ahead and make this 2.4 and hit enter. Or alternatively, you can type 8 FT to actually get 8 feet. And now we need to push this in on the doorway. So click on the cube. If you can't click on the cube, you'll see up here in the upper left corner, if you see it's in object mode, yours might be in edit mode or some other one. Just make sure this is in object mode over here. So we're going to want this cube to move towards the doorway, which if you see this axis selector up here, Y is the forward axis. So we're going to hit G to move the cube, hit Y to constrain this along the Y-axis, and we can push our mouse forward. And you say, oh, that's great, but you're under the floor. That's okay. Go ahead and left click, hit G again, and we're going to click Z for the up and down axis, and just kind of eyeball it in here. And that looks about right. We'll go ahead and push it on the scene by hitting Shift tilde, again the button under the escape key, and pressing W to move in on the scene. If we want to go faster, hold down Shift, and you can see this is, really close to 8 feet. So the Raven does make a point cloud from the LiDAR and true to life scale within probably 1% or so. But let's go ahead and zoom back out with, again, Shift tilde, and scroll back out. So this is pretty cool, but we want the scene to animate in and reveal different layers of the scene. For that, we need to give all the other layers the color data. So if I turn off this main scene one and turn on the other layers, you can see everything's black and white again. Let's just get the actual facade set up first. So we're going to turn off our other layers, click the facade, go over to shading, and you can see this little checkered ball. Click on the checkered ball. We'll click on the LiDAR color shader, and you can see everything that we did for our shading area is back. And now we need to get our geometry node back. Go to your geometry nodes again, click new, click this drop down on the left side, and we'll click LiDAR geometry since we've already made that. If your scene looks really dark, well, that's because we turned off our light by accident. There we go. Then let's save this before we go any further. So File, Save. I'm calling this Raven Facade Layers. We'll click Save Blender File. Now we can go to the Layout section since that's bigger and turn on our other layers besides the full scene. We're not going to need that one. And to give the color data to all the other layers in this scene, hold down Shift and select all the other layers that don't have color data first, and then finally, while still holding down Shift, select the object that does have the color data. That should show up as a light yellow object. Press Ctrl L, click Link Materials, and then click Ctrl L again and copy modifiers. Now your entire scene has the color data, and we can turn off each layer individually and still see the color. All right, now the scene's set up and we can start animating it. But if you're still here, you'll notice my shirt changing sometimes. That's because this is like the 5th day I've been working on this tutorial. So if I couldn't make this tutorial in one sitting, I don't expect you to watch this all in one sitting either. And as I said before, like realistically, you probably really need to do a beginner's course in Blender to have a better idea of what's going on. This is again kind of a crash course. I'll try to leave a note in the pinned comment and in the description of where you can see the course I actually took to learn Blender. And if you all have questions about what I've done so far, just leave a comment, and I assume other people have the same questions, so I'll try to put those answers in a pinned comment. Okay, so we're on the home stretch and let's get this thing animating in. The first thing we're going to do is set our camera position. And we're going to do that because if we just start animating in the scene, we don't know how far we have to move these objects up where they'll be out of frame of the camera. Let me show you what I mean. So again, if we'd select our facade, hit G as in good, and then Z to constrain the object along the Z axis or up axis. So we hit Z and move the mouse up, and it looks like the object is out of frame here. However, if our camera was tilted up further by pressing Shift tilde, we say ups, it looks like we can see everything again. So if we set all of our layers at that height and start animating them in, and then we needed to move the camera to this position, we have to reposition all the objects. So I'm going to hit Control Z to put this object back on the ground. So Control Z, there we go. That just undid the previous steps we took. So over on the right side of the screen in this layer menu, which is also called the outliner, you can see we have something called a camera. And right now it's turned off. So let's go ahead and turn it on. And you can see nothing happened, except on the left side of the screen, you can see this little yellow box and this point behind it. Let's go ahead and zoom in on that by hitting Shift tilde again and walking over to it. So this is the camera. And if you're wondering how you get to it, I'm going to left click to get out of this free view. If you've got a number pad, hit 0 and your view is now snapped to the camera. But if you don't have the camera, let's go ahead and back out of this for a moment by pushing in on the middle mouse button and then scrolling around. You can see that we're out of our camera view again. We can alternatively hit View in the upper left corner, Viewpoint, and then Camera. But again, a number pad's way easier. Since we're already in the camera mode, let's go ahead and talk about the settings very briefly. The first thing you might be wondering is, why does the outside of this box in the middle look really dark? Well, the middle box shows what the camera is actually seeing, and the darker area shows basically the periphery of the camera. Whenever we render this scene, you're not going to see anything out of this bright part. And if the outside is too dim for you to change that, make sure your camera is selected in the upper right corner of the screen. Go down to this camera icon that says data. Go ahead and click that. Go to Viewport display, and you'll see something that's called Password 2. I don't know if that's pronounced right, but you can move this slider to make things more obvious. If you want your screen to be filled with this bright area, hit the home button on your keyboard, or if you don't have a home key, you can use your middle mouse scroll to fill the screen to roughly the right size. Oh, and if you were hitting home and the screen wasn't filling, that's probably because your mouse was not actually in the same area as the camera. But I'll go ahead and hit home one more time. And now you can see the scene looks very narrow. It's because the lens we're using, I think, is a 50mm. To change the lens size, once again, select your camera, go down to the camera icon, which is data, go up to lens, and you can change the focal length to something wider. You can either type this in or click on the 50mm and drag to the left. Let's just make this like a 14mm. That's the equivalent to an ultra wide on a mirrorless camera. We'll go ahead and reposition the camera by pressing Shift tilde and then pressing W and Shift to go faster. We'll turn around and we'll frame up where we want the camera to be for this scene. We're not going to bother animating the camera and making it move. We're just going to make the scene fall into place here. So I'm happy with this location. I'll click the left mouse button to lock the camera in. Then we'll go up to this new tab that says Animation. Everything turned black and white. We'll go ahead and make this color again by going to the upper right corner of the screen and clicking on Viewport Shading again. And we'll go back to the active camera view by hitting 0 on the numpad or View, Viewpoint, Camera. And then either scrolling in with the mouse or pressing home to make the camera view fill up the entire screen. And what I think would be cool here is if the facade drops in from the sky first, then this little park drops in from the sky. Then to switch things up, we'll have the road come in from below the scene and raise up, and we'll do the same for the perimeter of the scene. But where everything's placed right now is where we want everything to end. So if you look down at the bottom of the screen, you have something here. That's a timeline, much like video editing software. We'll go to the end frame of this timeline by making sure your mouse is hovering in the timeline, holding down Shift, and pressing the right arrow on your keyboard. Or alternatively, you could kind of eyeball it by clicking and dragging this up to frame 250. We're going to select all of our layers by hovering our mouse in this gray area and clicking and dragging. That selects everything, or alternatively, you can click in the gray area again and press A on your keyboard. That selects everything. But this is the ending spot where we want everything to be. So you can press I as in information. So press I, and you can see something happened on this timeline. If we move our playhead a little bit away, you've got all these yellow things. Those are called keyframes. This is telling Blender at frame 250, we want everything in the scene to be in this position right here. Let's go ahead and go to the first frame. So have your mouse in the timeline window, hold down Shift and press the left arrow. And let's go ahead and select our background so nothing's selected. And then click on the facade first, hit G as in good. We're going to make this go up towards the sky to start out of frame. We want this constraint along the Z axis, so we hit Z and move our mouse up until it's completely out of frame. And that looks good. Click anywhere in the scene to confirm that change. And in the left window, you can see that this object is out of our camera viewport, but just barely. Since our facade is still selected, we can put our mouse in this main window here and once again hit I. And to make sure everything's working with our playhead on the timeline on our first frame, hit spacebar, and you can see everything comes into place. This is moving way too slow right now. We'll fix this later, but for now, we can see things are working. Let's go back to our first frame again by hitting Shift and pressing the left arrow. Then we'll select our park, hit G, press Z, and scroll the mouse up until the entire thing is out of frame. Then hit I, so we got a keyframe for that. We'll select our road, hit G, hit Z, and drag it down until it's out of frame. Click anywhere on the screen, press I again to add a keyframe. And finally, we'll select the perimeter, hit G, hit Z, and drag it all down. Then click, hit I for the keyframe, Then if we scrub through our timeline by clicking on the playhead and moving along the timeline, hey, everything looks right. But again, this is all too slow, and we don't want everything to come in at once because that just doesn't look all that cool. So I think our video is playing back at 30 frames a second. I'm actually going to switch this to 24 frames a second. You can make this whatever you want to. To change the frame rate, go up to this printer icon that says output, click that, and a little bit down you see something that says frame rate. It looks like we're actually at 24 frames per second, which is what I want. But you can change this to anything. But right now this animation is taking about 10 seconds or so because it's 250 frames, and 24 times 10 is 240, which is 10 seconds. So again, we're at roughly 10 seconds for this whole thing. But let's select all our keyframes. So we'll go up to our outliner window up here. Again, this is the outliner. Select all of our layers of the scene. All of our keyframes show up again. We're going to click and drag on all of these keyframes and move them to the left. We'll put this at like 84 frames right now. We can adjust later, but you can probably see where I'm going to go. So that way the animation kind of stacks in at different times. But let's see if this playback speed looks okay first. So we're at the first frame with a spacebar. Man, that's still really slow. Let's make this even quicker. Let's try for 36 frames. Yeah, we'll go for that. So the first thing that we want to come in is the actual facade or building. So we're going to keep that keyframe exactly where it is. The next thing we want to come in is this park. So we want those keyframes to move down a little bit. We'll select the keyframes for the park by clicking on this layer in the timeline and highlighting everything with A, and then clicking and dragging a few frames to the right. And if you want to see what keyframe this starts on, hit up on your keyboard, hit up again. That snaps to your keyframes. So it starts on frame 7. We'll go ahead and drag this playhead back to the right so we can see everything. Then we'll select our road. We will select our keyframes again and put this around number 12. Then we'll select our perimeter, grab the keyframes and put this around at 24. Then if we want to see how our keyframes are arranged, we can select all of our layers in the outliner by pressing the first one, holding down shift and selecting our last one. And here you can see the keyframes and how they're stacked. So let's go ahead and preview this with shift, left arrow, then spacebar. Yeah, it looks like the park came on too quickly, but everything else seemed roughly okay. We'll select the park and all the other keyframes and just move those down a little further. Go back to the start of the animation again, spacebar. Yeah, and there you go. That's a little animation. You can do more advanced things also, like make the keyframes ease into position more so they slow down as they approach the end. I mean, if you really want to do that, you go to the far left of this screen. You see these 4 little dots. Click on this drop down. We're in something called the dope sheet right now. You'll go to the graph editor, and if you would select something like the perimeter, for instance, you can see all these little dots showing up on the timeline, but there is one line here that looks like it has a little bit of a curve right here. So use your mouse and scroll out. You can press the middle button of your mouse and go up and just keep scrolling out. This represents the speed curve of how that layer animates in. Let's scroll back in on the ending of this and you can see it's kind of abrupt. So we can twirl down all these layers, and I think that was the Z location. So let's click the eyeball to show that again. Yeah, you can see that's here. We can select the left handle here. That's called a Bezier handle, at least in Adobe After Effects it is. If we want to constrain this just along the x-axis, we can again treat this like moving any other object by hitting G and then hitting X to constrain this on the x-axis and pulling it to the left with our mouse. And then once we click off, the perimeter layer should slowly go into place at the end. So let's start this timeline from the beginning, hit spacebar. You can see that last layer really went in smoothly. You can do that for all your layers if you want to, but for this demo, that's the only one I'm going to mess with here. And now let's go ahead and render this out so we can turn it into a video. But before we do that, I did mention earlier that we can relight this scene. If you wanted to make this more moody, we could click our light up here, and if you double click it, we can actually rename this to what it is. This is a sun. We can make the entire scene darker by clicking on the green light icon, which is data. We'll make the strength of this 1. So there is still some light showing. You can see how it looks when it's turned off. But if we want to add another light, click anywhere in the scene, hit Shift A, move the mouse down until you see light. We'll make this a point light. You can make it any of the others if you want. You can see this new yellow thing showed up. That's our light. It doesn't seem like it's doing anything. That's because it's really dim. With your point light selected, go down to the green light icon, which is data, and we'll increase the power over here by clicking and dragging to the right. Yeah, that looks pretty bright. You can see it's actually doing something. And let's say we wanted this light to kind of be in the doorway itself. You know, we could move this along the y-axis and then along the x-axis, but a quicker way to do this would be to press the number 7 on your number pad so we see a top-down view of the scene. We'll scroll out with the middle mouse button some. Again, with your point light selected, hit G, and now we're only going to move along the Y and X axis, not on the Z axis. But check this out. You can see all the 3D objects in the scene are casting shadows now from the light, so that's really cool. We'll go ahead and drag this to roughly where the doorway is, and we'll go ahead and click here. We'll go back to the active camera by pressing 0 on the numpad or clicking View, Viewport, Camera, and let's go ahead and raise this light up a little more. We'll hit G, and we want to constrain the light to the Z axis or up axis, so hit Z and move it up a little bit, or we can even put it up in the top balcony. There you go. That looks really bright. You know, we could lower the brightness of it, or we can also increase the radius in the light icon section and dragging the radius to the right, to about there or so. Don't make the sun brighter again so it doesn't look so dim. We'll just increase it until it looks good. There we go. And we're almost ready to render this. Rendering does take time, and our animation only takes a few seconds, so we don't actually need the full 250 frames for this. We'd just be wasting render time. So let's see when the last frame actually happens. That was on this layer here. We'll hit the up arrow key, and it's frame 72. So let's go back to our printer icon, which is your output. We'll set the end frame to frame 80, so we just have a little bit of extra room. Hit enter, and let's get rid of this gray background. So a little bit under this printer icon, you'll see an icon of the world. Hit the world icon. Under surface, you'll see something that says strength. That's kind of like an ambient light for the scene. Let's go ahead and click and drag this all the way to the left. Everything turns black. It'll click off the scene so we don't see all this orange stuff everywhere. And it actually looks pretty cool. When we render the scene, we're going to render it with something called an alpha channel. That means if there's no data that the scene's seeing, it's completely transparent, and we can put another background behind it in an editing program if you want to. So we're almost done. We're actually going to set up our render now. So once again, go to your output tab, which is the printer. Our resolution is 1920 by 1080, which is HD. You could change this, but I wouldn't bother with this right now. When we render this out, we do want to render this with an alpha channel, and a PNG will let you render with an alpha channel. Make sure your color shows RGBA. For the color depth, you could leave it at 8, but I'm going to put it at 16. And since we've said that we want this to render with a red, green, blue, and alpha channel, you think there'd be an alpha channel, but you have to tell Blender to do one more thing. In the camera symbol up here that says render, click that, go down to film, click transparent. Now we actually have a transparent background. Otherwise it would have rendered as black. You could mess with stuff like motion blur and depth of field here, but we're not going to get into that. To make the render look a little better, you can see up here we're using a render engine called Eevee. We're going to change that to Cycles, and man, look how much better this looks. I think Cycles models lighting better than Eevee does, but Eevee is much faster to set things up in. Cycles just takes a lot longer to render things out. Make sure your device is set to GPU instead of CPU. CPU would be really slow. Make sure denoise is selected here, otherwise you have a bunch of little white spots from rendering noise in your scene. Select use GPU. For denoiser, I'm going to choose OptiX since I've got an NVIDIA graphics card. And now we're actually ready to render this thing. So back to the output tab, we'll go down to the section that says output. Again, make sure you're in PNG, make sure you're using RGBA for your alpha channel. And let's select the output by clicking on the folder icon. Make a folder wherever you want to save this by clicking this folder plus symbol. I'm calling this Raven Facade Images 01 since we're going to output a bunch of images instead of a video file, and then turn those images into a video file in just a moment. So click accept, then name these images something. And I'm calling this Raven Facade Images version 01, then an underscore since each PNG file will have a number next to it. Click accept, then move your mouse up to the upper left corner of the screen where it says render. We're going to do render animation. Click that, and the scene will start processing. However, looks like our time remaining for each image is going to take, well, basically 30 seconds or so for each image. And you can also see we have this cube in the image, which we don't want that. And we're actually not animating the scene in properly. So let's figure out what's going on. Let's close out of this. We can actually limit how long each frame takes to render by going up to this camera symbol again. And we can put a time limit on each frame. We'll just bump this up to like 15 seconds. Click anywhere on the screen. Go back to the output. Frame start is 1, ending frame is 80. If we go to the start of our playhead with shift left, this should be working now. Let's save, Control S, then go to render again in the upper left corner of the screen and render animation. And the cube's showing up because when we click on this cube layer, we did turn it off with the eye symbol, but it's still going to show up on the render with the camera symbol. So let's go ahead and turn off the render. We'll turn off the eye. Click save. Okay, this took me a moment to figure out, but the last thing we need to do is make sure the main scene that has like everything put together does not render out. That's why the animation wasn't working before, because the scene was basically rendering, that layer that we turned off to start with. So just make sure that layer is turned off. Now when we hit render animation, everything should work right. So fingers crossed. Yeah, we're not seeing anything in the background. And you can see the frame numbers counting in. We're on frame 11 and part of the facade is falling into place, so everything is working properly. So we'll come back in a moment once this is all done. Now we're finally on the home stretch, and we're going to take those series of images that we just made from the Blender export, which you can see right here, and turn those into a video. For that, we're going to use a program called DaVinci Resolve, and there's a free version of it. So go ahead and click DaVinci Resolve, go to the free download, choose your operating system, and install this like any other piece of software. Once that's installed, go ahead and launch Resolve. You'll go ahead and make a new project in the lower right corner of the screen. I'm calling this Raven Blender Renders 01. Click create. And on this page, we want to set up the resolution for our project. To do that, go to the lower right corner of the screen. You'll see a gear icon, click the gear icon. And in the top of the screen, you'll see something that says master settings. The resolution we exported from DaVinci Resolve was 1920 by 1080, which this is the right resolution. And in Resolve, our timeline was in 24 frames per second. So this is correct. And since all these settings are right, I'm going to click cancel. But if you had to change anything, click save. Now, to bring those images into DaVinci Resolve so they become a video file, at the bottom center of the screen, you'll see these various icons. Go to the far left one that says media, click that. To make the images come in as a video file, right next to your preview window here, you'll see these three little dots. Click on the dots, go to frame display mode, and make sure this says sequence. If this doesn't say sequence, you'll see a series of images instead of a video file. Now we're going to bring in those images, so open Windows Explorer where your files are, select all your files with Control A, and click and drag to this blank space at the bottom middle of the screen. And we have a video file here. On this preview, you can scrub through it with your mouse. That's pretty neat. But to put a background on, we're going to make a sequence in a timeline. So at the bottom middle of the screen, you'll see something that looks like a timeline down here. If you hover over it, it says edit. Click on the edit icon, and this is the edit page. At the top to the left of your preview window, you'll see your new video file. Go ahead and click on that. Do a right click and click on create new timeline using selected clips. Name your timeline whatever you want. I'm calling this Raven Blender Render 01. Click create, and we've made a timeline. But the video file looks like it's really small over here. To zoom in, you can either hit Control plus a whole bunch of times, or under your preview window here, you'll see this plus and minus bar. You can click and drag to zoom in. Now our video clip looks much larger and we can see what we're doing. Let's go ahead and click play by hitting spacebar. That looks pretty neat. If we want to make this window bigger, let's go ahead and drag our playhead back to the beginning. To make this window bigger, you can click this little box next to this colorful circle, and it'll give you a bigger window. If you want this window to be even bigger than this, press Control F as in Frank, then hit spacebar to play the video back, and you can see this take up your entire screen. Hit Control F to get back out of it. And in Blender, I said we can replace the background if we want to. To do that, go down to your video clip in the timeline, raise this up one level because we're going to put a color behind it on the bottom track. I mean, you could even put an image back there if you want to, but for this, we'll just put in some of Resolve's built-in colors. Go up to Effects in the upper left corner of the screen, click on that. Under Titles, in Generators, we see something that says Grayscale. Let's go ahead and click on that and drag it below our video file. And just like that, we have this new gradient behind the entire image. If we go back to the beginning of the timeline again and hit play, you can see everything animates in with our new background. And if you want to extend the video clip we made in Blender, hit B as in boy, hover over your video clip, click on your video clip that we made in Blender, then hit A as in apple to get to our arrow tool again. Click on the area that we made after this cut. Then we can click on change clip speed, and over here we're going to change this to a freeze frame. So click on that, then click change. Now we can click on the end of this clip and drag it out as far as we want to. Bring the playhead back to the beginning and hit spacebar or this play symbol, and everything will animate in just as before, but the scene will stay up longer. And I'll show you a few more tricks in Resolve before we actually export the video file. We can do something kind of neat like make the gradient background animate onto the scene. To do that, we'll use keyframes just like we did in Blender. We'll go ahead and go back to the beginning of our timeline, click on our grayscale layer, go to cropping, and you see these keyframes on the right side of cropping. We want the grayscale to animate on from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen. So we'll put a keyframe on the crop right. By clicking the keyframe, we will drag the crop right to the far right of this, so that way it's completely hidden. Then we will drag our playhead a few seconds forward, maybe 2 seconds. And we don't need to put another keyframe here. The program will know that since we've moved our playhead in time, that when we drag this over, it's going to make a keyframe automatically for you. And you can see it added a keyframe by making it red. When we play this through once more, you can see the background come onto the scene as everything else animates. And just like in Blender, you can smooth out the end of this animation. And to do that, make sure your grayscale is still clicked. Go up to the keyframes button in the top part of your menu bar. Then just below the keyframes, go to the left. You'll see something that looks kind of like a safety pin sort of. It says keyframe curves, click that. And here's our speed ramp. Right now there's no ramp, it's all linear. If we want to make this ramp in and out of the animation, press Ctrl A to select all our keyframes. Then in the menu just above this area, you'll see a bunch of different types of eases. We're going to do the middle-ish one that says ease in and ease out. And also, just like in Blender, you have your Bezier handles that you can click on and drag if you really want to, but we'll leave these as default. and play this back again. So now the gradient background kind of ramps in and out. It makes everything look a little smoother. And if we're not quite happy with the color of our Blender scene, we can also change those colors over here by going to the bottom of the screen, hovering over this circle thing with a bunch of smaller circles in it. That's our color correction tab, so click on that. And you can spend years learning DaVinci Resolve. I'm just gonna go through a few very basic settings for you. If you want the world to be brighter, there's multiple ways you can do this, but for this tutorial, we'll go ahead and make sure that we are in our color wheel section. It's the circle and has a smaller circle in the middle. Then make sure we're in our curves section. And here we can change the brightness by clicking on the right side of the arrow and dragging it up. And if we want the dark colors to be even more dark, as in more contrasty, we can click on the left part of this curve and drag them down. And that also made things even more saturated, so we can decrease the saturation by clicking and dragging on the saturation here if we want to. And we can make it black and white. And in here you can even keyframe all this stuff too, so you can make it so it starts in black and white and turns into color. You can do all sorts of things here. But for now, we're going to undo everything we just did by double-clicking the saturation name. That brings us back to the default. And to undo our curves, we can either right-click on each of the curves we made, and that'll get rid of them, or we can click on this undo button in the upper right section of the curve panel. But since we did extend the clip, I want to show you something just to make this super easy. See what we're doing. I'm going to make the saturation 0 and then go back to our edit page. And you see we put this cut here. Well, that's going to mess us up because if we go from before the cut, that's still in color. If we go past the cut, it turns black and white. To fix this, there's a couple things you can do. You can click on the part of the video we made the color correction, do a right click, copy, or Control C. Put your playhead over the part of the video that's not color corrected. You can do a right click and paste attributes, or press Alt V as in Victor. We can choose what we want to paste over here. We're just going to paste color correction, hit apply, and now we have black and white for everything. Now if you're actually keyframing the scene from color to black and white, this won't work very well. We want to make this all one individual clip. So let's go ahead and remove all the color correction by highlighting all these clips, right clicking, remove attributes. We're going to say all video attributes, click apply. Then we'll need to make the part of the video clip where we cut it longer again by once again right clicking, change clip speed, freeze frame, click change, and drag this back out. Then select these clips that we just split up, right click and say new compound clip. I'm just going to leave this called compound clip 1, click create. And now it is one individual video clip. And that's placed in our media pool in the upper left corner of the screen. You can see this is called compound clip 1. Now if we go back to the color correction page and make everything black and white, go back to our edit page, you can see everything is black and white from the start. But let's go ahead and leave this in color. So back to the color page. And to undo all these settings, we can right click on this node right here. So right click and click reset node grade. Now to export the video, go to the bottom of the screen. You'll see something that looks like a rocket. That's called the deliver page. So go ahead and click on that. You've got an entire new page that pops up. This is where we decide what settings we want to export this as. In this video tab right over here, I'm going to make this format in MP4 since like every computer should play that. For the codec, I'm going to turn this to H.264 since again, every computer now should be able to play that. We can leave all of these other settings the same. If you wanted to, you could remove the audio by clicking the audio tab and then unchecking audio. Since the Blender file doesn't have any audio, this would save a little bit of space, but it's not necessary to do. Then let's go ahead and name this file. I called this Raven Facade Resolve since we're using DaVinci Resolve. Export, gradient, background 01. I know that's like a really long name, but it makes sense to me. Choose the file location by clicking Browse. Navigate to whatever folder you want this in. I made a folder called Resolve Blender Renders. I double clicked it. Then I'm going to click Save. Then at the bottom left of the screen, you'll see Add to Render Queue. Go ahead and click on that. Then click Render All on the right middle of the screen. And that rendered incredibly fast. It only took 1 second. Let's go ahead and see how that looked. So open up Windows Explorer, navigate to the folder we just made, then double click your file. And here this file is opening up and everything animates as it should. And you might not be able to see this very well in the screen recording, but if you use this gradient background, you will see a bunch of banding or a bunch of lines going down the screen. That's because H.264 generally exports as an 8-bit file and you're just never going to get very smooth gradients with it. But you could fix this by exporting an H.265 file over here and changing the encoding profile from main to main 10, then renaming the file. I'm going to put an O2 at the end, clearing the export we just did on the right side of the screen by hitting the X, then click Add to Render Queue and render all. Then when we play this video back, we will see if the banding is gone, and the banding is gone, just as expected. I don't know if this shows up on the recording. I think I'm recording everything in 10-bit HDR, but I think when I'm editing this, I'm editing everything in 8-bit Rec 709, so this you probably won't see a difference here. And with that export from DaVinci Resolve, that's the entire workflow to go from capturing LiDAR data to creating a LiDAR file in Ray Studio, exporting it as a .las file, taking it into CloudCompare, cleaning up the file, splitting it all into layers, saving each file as a PLY ASCII version, then taking all those files we made in CloudCompare, going into Blender, bringing those files into Blender, adding color data to each layer, lighting the scene, messing with our camera, and animating the scene in, then exporting it from Blender and taking it into DaVinci Resolve, adding a new background, and exporting the video. I know that probably seems like a ton of steps, and it kind of is, but once you do this, I don't know, 10 or 20 times, like, you don't even think about it anymore. It's all super easy. Okay, and way back at the start of this video, I said I'd show you a comparison between the Raven and the Eagle, so I'll go ahead and show that now, and I'll remove myself from the screen so I'm not a distraction. Let's check out the Gaussian splatting first. So we'll start with this facade that we shot. So this is the Eagle facade here. It looks really nice. There might be a few floaters from the Gaussian splat, but I don't see very many of them. There's the back side. I don't really have much else to say about this other than, at least from this distance, everything looks really nice on the Eagle. So we're going to finish this up and then I'll show you the Raven version. So here we are, we're finishing this up right now, and we'll stop here, then check out the Raven. So here's the Raven, and I do want to point out that this is probably an early version of the firmware for the Raven, so hopefully this gets updated. And the biggest issue I had with the Raven right now is that you couldn't adjust the exposure far enough down to get the proper brightness of the capture. You can see everything's a little too bright, so that kind of washed out the saturation. But keep in mind that the base version of the Raven, at least for the moment, looks like it's going to retail for $1,699, whereas the Eagle base unit looks like it's retailing for $3,998 whenever it's not on sale. So the Raven does cost less than half of what the Eagle does. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and check out this Gaussian splat. Now, one thing that I do notice is that I don't see any floaters in this image. I mean, towards the top, you can see some little artifacts, but, you know, in the sky around these trees, I don't see any floaters. But again, I do think that the Raven still needs some firmware updates to let you change the exposure so the exposure's lower. I did, however, scan one other location when the sun was going down more, and that actually does have the right exposure. So let's go ahead and jump into those scans that I took as the sun was setting. We'll go ahead and click out of this, and I went to this place in Louisville called the Louisville Slugger Museum and Factory. It has this giant novelty bat here, and let's check that out. So back in Ray Studio, let's check out the Eagle first. And here we are with the Eagle. I'm going to walk down the street and see how the bat looks. Surprisingly, I see a lot more floaters around in the sky with the Eagle version of the Gaussian splatting. I don't know if they're showing up very well on the preview here, but I will try to upload these files so you can see for yourself. So here's the Eagle one. Let's go ahead and move in on the bat some more, walking up to the bat. You can see a bunch of kind of floaters here on the ground. The ground doesn't look particularly detailed. The brick, however, does look nice, mostly nice. I mean, you can definitely see what's going on, but maybe not the cleanest Gaussian splat. But the streets do look pretty nice. Yeah, overall, you can easily tell what's going on. Let's check out the Raven version now. So here's the Raven version I've processed previously. Going to Gaussian Splat and preview. And we'll start at the end of the street again. The first thing I noticed right away, the stoplights look way better. And as I mentioned before, the exposure on the Raven actually did look pretty correct in camera here as the sun was going down. You can see there's like basically no floaters in this scene at all, which I mean, I'm pretty blown away by how good this looks. If we go up to the bat, higher up isn't quite as detailed as down low, but these are using really wide angle cameras, so I don't really expect to get a bunch of detail from something that's like 80 feet up in the air. But if we look down, this is pretty surprising. You can actually see details in the brick down here, whereas on the Eagle, the ground kind of fell apart. If we look at the bricks over here, man, they look pretty darn perfect. Yeah, I mean, I was pretty blown away the first time I saw this Raven scan. Like, this looks, if not photorealistic, incredibly close to photorealistic. Like, I would be happy showing this to anybody. Going down the street some more. Let's check out this horse at the end of the street. Yeah, I mean, that looks pretty good. You can see the names of things in the windows. You can read everything. You can read the text. Scroll back around and go down the street the other direction. And again, I'll go ahead and upload these to the JimuMeta site so you can check these out for yourself. But this is, again, just a quick preview in case you don't want to check that out. Yeah. So here's the Raven. Yeah, looks really, really good. And I don't know if I could even make this Gaussian splat with a regular camera. I just don't know if it would process properly or not, as I think the Raven takes the LiDAR data and attaches the Gaussian points probably to the LiDAR point cloud. So that's really cool. Okay, now that we've done that, I think that when you have the proper exposure with the Raven, at least for this particular scan, the Raven turned out better. So now that we've compared the 3D Gaussian splats, let's go ahead and check out the LiDAR scan data in Blender between the Raven and the Eagle. Here's the render for the Eagle. We're going down the street. You can see that the LiDAR point cloud is very dense. However, check out those light posts on the left side of the frame next to the bat. You can see that the middle of them is missing. That's because the LiDAR portion of the Eagle doesn't pick up black particularly well, especially if it's glossy. But you can see everything looks pretty darn sharp when it does pick up the data. You can't quite make out text on any of the signs or the bat. And you also see floating spheres throughout the scene. That's because I didn't do any point cloud thinning. I wanted to show you what the results actually look like from the Eagle. And now let's check out the Raven. I'll do a side-by-side comparison in a moment, but the first thing I noticed is that the image looks a little more fuzzy. However, the light posts do show up completely, so it does pick up black better from the LiDAR scan. You can actually almost make out the text on the bat, which is interesting. You couldn't do that on the Eagle. However, as I said earlier, the image is a little more fuzzy than the Eagle, and the point cloud isn't nearly as dense. There also does seem to be less noise in the sky from the Raven, which is interesting. But once this finishes up in a few more seconds, we'll go ahead and compare the two starting frames from the Eagle and the Raven. So here we go. I've got the Eagle on the left side of the screen, and notice how sharp the buildings look compared to the Raven. You can also see that the Eagle's LiDAR range and field of view has some advantages. In the 4-story building on the right, you can see that the Eagle's point cloud is still pretty dense. Whereas if we look at the Raven, notice how much more sparse that is. And then if we reframe the image and check out the bat that's poking up above the tree, the top of the bat actually looks pretty well defined on the Eagle. Whereas on the Raven, you can still tell there's something poking up, but it's kind of hard to tell what that is. Now, to be fair, no one's actually ever going to be checking out these two LiDAR scanners side by side, so if you'd only ever seen the Raven, I don't think you'd realize what you're missing with the Eagle. And as I said before, the Raven actually does have some advantages picking up dark objects like the light posts that are next to the Slugger bat, whereas the Eagle really does struggle with reflective dark objects. So that was actually really surprising that the Raven picked that up better. But in my opinion, with at least this version of the Raven's firmware and this version of Ray Studio, the Eagle does create a sharper LiDAR scan. However, the Raven does have one more trick up its sleeve. Remember that the Raven not only does LiDAR point clouds, it also does 3D Gaussian splats, or 3D GSs. And the results from the Raven on the 3D Gaussian splats were actually better than the Eagle for this scene. So what if we could take that 3D Gaussian splat data and somehow turn it into a point cloud? So I ended up getting a studio subscription for the Gaussian splats, and you can see it remove the watermark. And then we could also export that file as a PLY version. So what if we take this Gaussian splat and bring it into Blender? Well, how are we going to do that? Gaussian splats are actually made up of a bunch of little points with what are essentially like colored blurs attached to them. And we can actually take that into CloudCompare. So check this out. If we would normally take this into CloudCompare, we've got all these fields here which don't seem to make any sense. So normally we just click apply all. And if we zoom in on the project, we've got this crazy green looking thing. Well, that's called a scalar field. If we click on none, everything turns white. And Gaussian splats don't store color the same way as the LiDAR cloud does with that COL value that we talked about earlier in Blender. And in fact, CloudCompare doesn't even realize there is color data for this. But there actually is color data. We just need to tell CloudCompare what the color data is and mess with some numbers. So let's go ahead and delete this and bring it back in the right way. We'll click on the folder and hit delete. And here we go. We're going to bring this back in and we're going to work some magic. In that scalar field section, we can actually add the color there. So go down to add and then do it 2 more times since we need the red, green, and blue data. And on the top one that says none, we're going to change that to the FDC 0. For the next one, that's going to be FDC 1. And for the last one, it'll be FDC 2. We'll click apply all. And once it loads in and we zoom in on the object, you can see that, well, this looks the exact same as before. Well, we're part of the way to fixing this. With that layer selected, go up to Edit, Colors, from Scalar Fields. And here you can see we have a red, green, and blue value. But the value is set to scale 0 right now. We need to set these values to those FDC values we brought in. So for red, we go down to the scale, and we set this to FDC 0. For green, we set that to FDC 1. For blue, we set that to FDC 2. Then if we were to apply this right now, everything's going to turn out really dark. We need to change these minimum and maximum values. So I got these saved on a clipboard. The minimum will be negative 1.77 and the maximum will be 1.77 for everyone. So I'm going to copy the negative one first and paste it into all the fields. Then for the maximum one, I'll grab the 1.77 value and paste it into all of the RGB fields. Then once we have our color set, you see this alpha area, unclick on the Fix button and click Apply. We can go ahead and close this, and magically everything turned to color. Pretty cool. And if this didn't turn a color for you right away, it might be because on the colors area in your properties, it's still on scalar field. Change that to RGB. And there we go. But everything still looks pretty dim, especially when we compare this to our Raven LiDAR scan. You see how much brighter that is? Well, we can make this brighter here by going onto the alpha channel and clicking on the maximum and dragging it to the left to around negative 7.5. It can really be any number, just needs to be far to the left. Hit apply, and suddenly this is really bright. So let's go ahead and click close. And again, make sure you're on colors, RGB, and your properties tab. Again, if you're in scalar fields, you'll probably have crazy colors, so put on RGB. And look how detailed this looks, especially compared to the LiDAR scan. If we turn off our Gaussian splat, you can see the LiDAR scan looks kind of fuzzy. But again, if we switch on the Gaussian splat and turn off the LiDAR scan, man, that's really sharp from the Raven. But there is one issue. If we bring this into Blender as is, look at all these points around here. I think that's because for the Gaussian splats, we told it to keep the sky. If we didn't have the sky, a lot of these points would probably be gone. So we just need to remove all these points right now. And you might be thinking that's going to take forever, but we can fix that pretty quickly. Let's first check out the top-down view by hitting 8 on the number pad, and let's quickly crop out everything that we do not want in the scene. So we use our segment tool or the scissor tool. This doesn't need to be perfect. We're just going to do a quick cutout around the scene for things we definitely don't want, and then do a right-click to finish this segment tool. And we want to keep everything inside here, so we're going to click the segment in tool, then click the green check mark and turn off this background layer by clicking the lower layer. So let's go ahead and check out the street, and we'll quickly crop out the top and bottom that we don't need. So go back to the segment tool and do a rough cut of the top and bottom. We'll go ahead and segment in and click the green check mark and turn off the background layer. Now, if we'd bring this into Blender, there would be all sorts of floating dots throughout the scene, and this would look terrible. Let's go ahead and clean that up really fast by making sure our layer is selected, going to the statistical outlier filter or SOR. And these settings are a little different than what come up by default, but I've already put this in and these settings seem to work pretty good. So I had 12 on the top and 2 on the bottom. We'll go ahead and click OK. And suddenly, basically all the noise is removed. Like, look how clean this scene looks now. And you can see that since we did use the paid plan on JimuMeta, we have lost the 3D Maker Pro watermark down here, so that's awesome. Now we just need to export this, and we can export this the same way we do for anything out of CloudCompare. So we'll go ahead and select our layer, name this something that we will remember, then click the Save button. Make sure it's in your right folder, click Save, and make sure it's an ASCII file. I'll go ahead and throw this into Blender just like any LiDAR file by importing the POI. And then just like before, we'll go to the Shading tab, make a new shader. I call this 3DGS material. Pressing Shift A as an alpha, typing in attribute, and adding in the attribute node, connecting the color to the base color. And normally the 3D Gaussian splats don't have this color attribute in them, but since we added this in CloudCompare, check this out. We have our 3DGS layer, and we can go down to the Data tab. Under Attributes, we have a COL file for color, which that doesn't normally come in by default. So let's go ahead and under the attribute section, go ahead and name this capital COL for color. Go back to our geometry nodes, go ahead and make a new one. I'm calling this 3DS geometry, and I'm going to add all of the fields we did for our regular LiDAR scan. We've got the node tree set up over here. We've got our input, mesh to points, set point radius, set material, and we'll go ahead and click on the checkered beach ball and select the 3DGS material. Then go to the upper right corner of the screen to the viewport shading, click that, and magically we have color. Let's go to our layout menu, since that's bigger, and click on our viewport shading once more to bring us back into the color mode. And check out how detailed this looks. Actually, these points are a little big. Let me go ahead and shrink them down to what the other LiDAR point clouds are, which was 2 centimeters. There we go. That's more the regular size. So back to layout. And we'll go to our active camera by pressing 0 on the numpad. And let's quickly preview how this looks compared to the regular Raven LiDAR. We'll turn off the 3DGS. Yeah, you can clearly see the 3DGS is much sharper than the Raven LiDAR alone. So let's go ahead and render this out and see how it looks. Here is the 3D Gaussian splat render of the Raven. As we're going down the street, check out how sharp the buildings on the right side of the screen are, and also how sharp the light posts are right next to the bat. Those are incredibly sharp. You can even see the text on the screen for the bat. And as we go away from the bat, look at the trees. You can see the branches on the trees, which you couldn't see branches on the LiDAR data, so that is very impressive. Now I've put all three renders on the screen at the same time. In the upper left corner, we've got the Raven 3D Gaussian Splat render. On the right's the Raven LiDAR render. And in the bottom is the Eagle LiDAR render. And as we're going through the scene, I would probably pause the scene occasionally to see what the strength of each technique actually is and the strength of each scanner. You'll notice that I have a black background for these scenes. Well, in just a moment, we will put a white background on it, and the white background will give you a better idea of just how dense each point cloud is. If you're seeing a bunch of white behind the scenes, that's the background poking through the point cloud. So the more white you see, the less dense the point cloud is for that scan. And everything again is in the same spot. The Raven 3D Gaussian Splats in the upper left, the Raven LiDAR scans on the right, the Eagles on the bottom, and you can see that the Raven 3D Gaussian Splat is the least dense. However, we did do the statistical outlier filter on that one, which did remove quite a bit of point clouds. But if we didn't do that, you'd see a ton of floating points in the sky. Then we'll play this in reverse one more time just so you can check it out from the opposite direction. One thing that really did surprise me with the 3D Gaussian Splat point clouds is look at the road. You can really see how well the road markings show up, whereas on the LiDAR data, they show up somewhat, but not particularly well. But again, the LiDAR data is more dense than the 3D Gaussian Splat data, so everything's kind of a series of compromises. And I don't know if I said this, but what I do for a living is shoot and edit video, and video camera technology has been out forever, but each type of video camera has its own set of strengths and weaknesses. So there's no perfect video camera, and as you can see in this comparison, each LiDAR scanner also has its own strengths and weaknesses. Straight out of the Eagle, it does make a more dense point cloud, and it is sharper than the Raven's point cloud. However, the Eagle does cost over twice as much as the Raven. But from kind of hacking together a workflow with 3D Gaussian Splats for a point cloud render, we can get results that somewhat match the Eagle, at least in terms of sharpness, albeit at the cost of point cloud density. I know this was a long video, but there's so much to cover because we finally reached the point where LiDAR isn't just for surveyors with massive budgets anymore. And historically, whenever technology makes its way from the industrial world into the hands of everyday creators, we start seeing it used in ways that the original engineers never imagined. Think about the first computers. They were room-sized machines built for cracking codes and calculating battleship firing trajectories. But today, that same technology is in our watches, it's what I use to edit this video, and it's even helping us accomplish things we wouldn't be able to solve on our own, thanks to AI. Which, if I'm being honest, is actually how I came up with a lot of these CloudCompare and Blender integrations. And just like computers have evolved over time, I'm sure we'll see new uses for LiDAR we can't even imagine yet. But people need to be shown how to use these tools in order to speed up adoption. And that's really kind of the purpose of this video, to help speed up that adoption, and so you don't have to spend weeks and months getting up to speed to start creating. And while I use the 3D Maker Pro Raven to show you the ropes, remember that what you just watched, the CloudCompare processing, the Blender animations, the 3D Gaussian Splat workflows, all that isn't just limited to one device. This video is a kind of cheat sheet you can apply to almost any LiDAR system. But with that said, if you want a product that you know actually works straight out of the box, and maybe most importantly, doesn't tie you to a $1,000 annual software subscription, take a look at the 3D Maker Pro store and browse their lineup. It honestly might change the way you see the world and maybe even open up a new career for you. So if you have questions or just want to talk more about any of this, leave a comment or friend me on Facebook, LinkedIn, or whatever social media platform is popular in the future. And you can DM me and I'll get back to you. Or if you just want to see the files I used to make this video so you can play around with this stuff yourself, check the video description. I'll include links for you to download. And as long as this video was, we're still kind of just touching the surface. So if you want to see more of this, hit subscribe, let me know what you want to see next, and I'll see you in the future.